how are you?
Hi, Linda.
Hi, Zosia, how are you? I'm actually going to start. My first question with you is how much did you know about the Decameron before getting involved in this?
I didn't know anything. I'd never heard of the text before. It
Okay.
was described to me sort of as like the Italian Canterbury Tales, which I do remember. I didn't do very well in school, so maybe I learned about it, but I just wasn't paying much attention. But this was my first foray into that text.
Yeah. Zosia, how about you?
Not a bean. Um, I feel like I'd heard the word, might have been floated around before, but it never landed anywhere or like cemented into any venture of figuring it out further. So yeah, this was sort of my first interaction with it.
Sasha, I really liked what I liked about this was the sort of the ridiculousness of it and the sort of the more absurdist version of it. Talk us through sort of with the discussions you had with Kathleen on how you should present your character, how you should play her.
I think the wonderful thing about doing this show and having all of these characters who were so zany in their own right was having someone like Kathleen at the helm who really allowed us to kind of push the boundaries. And she told us early on that like all of our floors and our ceilings are probably a bit different as characters. And so like Saoirse and I kind of lived in a pretty our ceiling was maybe like someone else's stratosphere. But I think it was just a manner of like embracing the absurdity of the situation while also trying to keep it grounded. But so much of that too was on the page, and so much of that as well was um, having a scene partner like Saoirse, who is just like no matter how far she goes, her feet always stay so firmly planted on the floor. Like, no matter how zany the comedy, it always comes from such a grounded place. So I always just felt like I was in good stead when I got to be across from her.
Saoirse, your character is someone who lives through her mistress. Basically, she lives through her ups and downs, and she doesn't differentiate herself from her. She still believes that there are people who are better than others. Talk us through that character and how much was it fun playing her, sort of getting to know what that kind of person would have been like in those times?
I think it's always fun to play a character that's thinking on their feet all the time. And that's what it's like for Misia. She's just sort of like moving through the waves, although it's quite tragic, and she's grieving as well. I think through my life, when I find myself in places of grief, it's always when the funniest things have happened to me. And that really lent itself to Misia. I feel like I was profoundly lucky to have had a scene partner like Zosia Mamet going into those like really quite dark scenes that we could find the light and shade in it together. And I think when you really get on so well as people, you can really create that. And intimacy was quite a shorthand for us, quite fast on, to be able to reach that point to give that sort of legacy of the trauma and the pain that has happened previous up until when we meet her at this point. But it was really fascinating, and I had a conversation with Kathleen Jordan, our writer, about like why she wanted this character on the show and the sort of insane arc and story that she goes on. And Kathleen had explained to me that quite often in television series, when we meet people of like a lower class, that are in these sort of like servitude roles, they're like rolling their eyes, or the jokes is sort of on them, like on the posher people. And of course that's so satisfying as an audience member, but a lot of the time that's not truthful to how it actually is. A lot of time that sort of cohesive control and that emotional manipulation runs so deep that your value is actually completely locked and loaded in your master. So it was definitely like a fun thing to push forward with. And I couldn't have got luckier with having Zasha to do that with.
Sasha, your character Pampinea is a bit of a mean girl, but she's only a mean girl because she thinks so. badly of herself. She thinks she's inferior to most people because she's over 30, she's not married yet, and all of this stuff is happening around her. Talk us through that character. And I think she's a really interesting, very complex character. Talk us through that and sort of having to sort of dig deep in finding that her motivations.
Yeah, I think people who are insufferable definitely don't think that they're insufferable.
True.
And I think 9 times out of 10 people who behave in an atrocious manner like she does, or like you said, are mean to others around them or unpleasant to be around, it's not necessarily because they want to be acting that way. It comes from such a deep-seated insecurity, which she is clearly unable to get out of the tidal wave of. And I think that was probably because she was neglected as a child and never received the love that she needed in her formative years. And I think she's always just been in search of that love and that approval, which she's clearly never gotten from men. She's never gotten from the friendship of other women, because in her attempt to find it, she inadvertently pushes everyone else away from her. And I think then it becomes like this vicious cycle of a self-fulfilling prophecy that she's like, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, so I'm going to go in search of something to make me feel loved and make me feel whole. But she goes about it all wrong. And so people keep just sort of corroborating the fact that she's not lovable and she's not good enough. And then she doubles down and she doubles down. And really the only person who does love her is Misia. So it's an incredibly nuanced relationship because it is a master-servant power dynamic. And yet I do think she honestly needs Misia in a really intrinsic way, because I think she's the only constant in her life. And I think Pampinea is she's very much like a child. I think she has a real arrested development. I think she probably never ascended to adulthood in any real way, because she never really was given the love to make her feel secure enough to grow up.
Yeah, I spoke to Kathleen about her own influences in making this, and she talked about like a number of things that she probably has talked to you about, like The Favourite and Blackadder and things like that. What are your own comedic influences that you felt like you might sort of be applicable to this? Saoirse, to start with.
I feel like between me and Zosia often talked about like female co-stars, and like it was never really the tone of the comedy. It was just more like the intensity that we talked about. And we talked about like Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn.
Oh, good.
We spoke about like Joan Rivers quite a lot when we were on set. They came up. So I feel like that intensity, Bette Midler, always ran around in my mind as well. When working with Zosia. So that sort of like presence was definitely in my subconscious of those sort of like Hollywood stars when I'm around Zosia.
Yeah, Saoirse.
Yeah, I think it wasn't necessarily projects that we talked about in terms of like the ethos of what we were doing. I agree. It was more sort of like, I think it was like the sharpness of it. Like a lot of what our dynamic felt like, it was the intensity and the sharpness. And so like it was like a very intense tennis match between the two of us, was how it always felt. It always sort of felt like we were a bit at an 11. So like, yeah, who are the women that we would mine from in order to like mimic that intensity, like Saoirse said.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, you guys. And congratulations again. I thought it was really very funny and I loved it very much. So congrats again. Okay, thanks for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey, you guys!
Hey, you